In this video, we will talk about understanding the school as a social system. This video is based on Chapter 2 from Educational Administration, Concepts and Practices, published by Lunenburg and Ornstein in 2011 and Cengage Learning. So we will begin by discussing dimensions of a social systems. We will talk about two expanded models that add cultural dimensions to the original models of schools as social systems. And finally, we will discuss some of the later models, which add also another dimension, focusing on the communities. So, overall, a social system, describes activities and interactions of group members who work together towards a common goal. And really, all these theories, models to understand the that helped us understand the administrative process, inside organizations viewed as social systems are associated with this works of several scholars who worked with this researcher Getzel. So one of the first models, which is called very often Getzel's GUBA model. These are two people who came up with this model. It views a social system, right, an organization as a social system with two independent and interactive dimensions. The first dimension is individuals and the second institutions, right? So the idea is that the institutions have certain roles and expectations that that are aimed, that are kind of they function to help the organization achieve the goals of the system, right? And the second dimension is about people who work in this systems, social systems and organizations. And the idea is that these individuals have their own personalities, needs, dispositions, and they interact between each other, and all of that interaction is actually what we see as the behavior of the entire social system, right? So from this dimensions, you can the Getzel and Guba came up with kind of two fancy words that describe activity in a social system, right? That describe what's going on in the social system. You can say it's another word for that would be like behavior in a social system, right? So the first dimension, nomothetic, is related to this institutions dimension, right? And can be understood as a normative dimension, where basically an organization which is kind of setting up the rules and expectations, describes the job descriptions and things like that. And then the ideographic dimension is connected with the individuals. It's the personal dimension, right, in this social system. So if we think about schools, right, so the nomothetic or normative or institutional dimension can be viewed in the role of schools as their goal is to educate, right? And that is one they serve by educating children and students. They serve one of the society's goals, and the second dimension of schools would be individuals, right, who actually perform those things, who educate, right, the teachers, the students, the principals, and the ministers of education, superintendents, etc., right, secretaries of education. So this would be the ideographic or personal, or the individual, the individual level dimension of schools as a social system, right? Schools viewed as social systems. So if we use, these two dimensions, nomothetic, ideographic, you can use the words normative and personal. you could really model. Think of behavior in schools through using this short equation, right? So B here represents for behavior, or everything, all the activity that you see in a social system, right? It could be a school, could be any other organization, right? So behavior is viewed as a function of two dimensions, as we discussed, right? R refers to it refers to the institutional role defined by the expectations that come with that role, and P refers to the personality of people, or the role players, defined by their personalities, by their needs and dispositions, right? So this makes intuitive sense, right? You can always think about what you see is like, here's the what their purpose is, right? By defined by the norms, by the expectations. But then you observe a person with his or her own idiosyncrasies, performing those that the role the way they want and they prefer, right? So perhaps in settings like the military, right? The role of R is more influential, right? Role and expectations are above many other things, especially the personality. In more like creative professions, maybe freelance, artists and other similar professions, you could see the role of personality being greater than the role of the nomothetic or normative dimension. Perhaps in schools and in universities and educational organizations in general, perhaps this proportions of role and personality, it's kind of balanced more or less, but depending on the specific educational system, depending on a specific role and a specific personality, you can definitely see different proportions of role and personality even in educational settings. So later, Getzel and other researchers, they realized that this original model, focusing only on two dimensions, nomothetic and, you remember, right? Nomothetic and ideographic, here they are, these two fancy words, try to remember them. So they realized that it is oversimplified, and because it only has two dimensions, well, you can guess it doesn't focus on other dimensions, which might also be important, which are actually important. And really, just focusing on those two dimensions brings the entire understanding of schools and in general and organizations in general closer to the closed system orientation, right? It's like as if people in schools, they just have their roles and their personalities, and they kind of do their own thing there, and there's nothing else happening, right? In fact, we know that closed system orientation is quite limited, right? So later, Getzels, together with Thelen, right? They expanded the original model. You can remember this model by its focus. They describe schools specifically as unique social systems, right? And basically how they expanded the original model is by adding cultural factors, right? Things like ethos, values, and the basic idea in their expanded model was that the R part, the sociological part, the nomothetic kind of dimension, right? The R role is mediated by cultural factors, right? In this expanded model, basically even the individual's personality functions can be viewed that as mediated to some extent by this cultural conditions, right? So later, even that model was expanded. So you see that still Getzels with two other guys, two other people, they came up with what's called a composite model of schools is social systems. Basically, you don't have to remember all this composite, unique stuff. Just these two are, both expanded models, right? So they added, what they did actually is they simply added a second cultural dimension, which according to their model mediates the personality aspect, right? So this both expanded models, especially this later one, brings the understanding of schools as social systems closer to the open system orientation. Okay, and overall, all these models, especially the expanded ones, they view educational administration as a social process, right? And culture, ethos, values, that individuals have, um, explain a lot of social behavior in schools and school systems, right? And any school system, according to this model, if you look at the classroom level, school level, or maybe school district level, right, they operate within a larger environment. Basically, those concepts that we see in the open system theories. Okay, so from all those expanded models, there are many useful theoretical, empirical, applications, right? So one thing that might be useful for social, school administrators is that from this composite model of schools as social systems, one could better understand sources of potential conflicts, okay, in a school. So there are three, using this model, one could come up with basically three sources of potential conflict: role conflicts, personality conflicts, and role personality conflicts, right? So a role conflict is when, within a role, the role requirements, they conflict with each other, right? For example, um, you know, if you are a university professor, imagine like maybe your department head tells you, hey, you should be a better teacher. You should spend a lot of effort on your teaching, because here are our department's goals, right? But then there is maybe a dean or vice rector for research, or vice chancellor for research, or whoever, like, telling you, the same professor, hey, our university needs to do more research. You should focus more on your research, right? We need more publications in better journals, so please do more research, right? So this would be an example of a role conflict when, within a role, requirements of the same role, they conflict with each other. They contradict each other, right? The second conflict, personality conflict, that happen. This kind of source of conflict, they come from within a person, right? Within the personality of every individual that is, fulfilling a specific role, right? An example could be, if, as a teacher, like if a school or a university requires from their teachers and instructors to be, distant, socially distant from students, right? So, for example, you cannot go out and have, I don't know, maybe you cannot go out and party with your students, right? However, maybe as a very extroverted person, or generally a person who believes in, out of the classroom communication being useful for, for learning, right? Maybe you wanna maybe take your students out and have a lunch with them, right? So here is an example of a personality conflict when, yeah, okay. So honestly, I think, so here it would be, you might be confused, like here's the requirement, right, to be socially distant, but really here it would be like, it's still within a person, because a person here might be willing to comply with the norms of the organization, right? The norm requiring that, um, there should be a social distance between teachers and students, right? And then there is the inclination to be a non-conformist, to do your own thing, something you believe is better. Okay, so here that's the example. That is what was in at the core of the example that I gave in the personality conflict. The third potential source of conflict comes from the discrepancies between the requirements of a role and the dispositions and needs and beliefs of an individual, right? So, for example, imagine you are a school principal, right? And your board of directors, or you are a superintendent, if we're speaking about the U.S. context, right? So your board expects you to be, to have very high public visibility, maybe to constantly, maybe to write a blog, to be active on social media, to meet with, to be there and here, to attend a lot of, public events. But you are an introvert, and your strengths are in other things, and you are uncomfortable doing all that stuff and being photographed and posted. You don't want to be on the internet, right? So that would be a role personality conflict, an example of this kind of conflict, right? And another useful thing that comes out from this expanded composite models suggested by Getzels and colleagues would be that based on this, using those dimensions, right, one can come up with the three suggested leadership follower styles. The first one would be normative, and the second would be personal, and the third, transactional. So the normative leadership follower style, stresses that the institutional role requirements should be followed and obligations should be delivered. So there is more focus on the institutional requirements rather than personal needs of individuals in this kind of leadership follower style. In the personal leadership follower style, there is more stress on the individual, on the personal activities and individual propensities, things that people care about, right? I mean, by people here, I mean the individuals performing this or that role in an institution, right? So the third leadership follower style, the transactional leadership follower style, represents kind of a balance between this two first styles, right? So the performance of the role requirements is considered important, and also the expression of personal needs of individuals is also kind of is considered important. So the leadership follower style kind of balances between these two extremes, and if necessary, of course, moving towards either end, but overall it is balanced. Okay. So later, these models, viewing schools as social systems, was expanded even further. So this Getzels, he did this. This Getzel did it on individually. This model without any colleagues. So the latest model proposed by Getzel adds a communities dimension to this entire to the earlier models viewing schools as social systems, right? So basically, this model, acknowledges the cultural setting of a school, right? So the social system is not just located in just an abstract environment, right? But from that environment, the cultural setting is perhaps dominant and important. It's the most important, is viewed as dominant, okay? And so Getzels identified 6 communities of education, and in community here means a group of people, yeah, who are aware, who are conscious of a collective identity. They have common cognitive and affective norms, values, and even patterns of relationships. Okay, so the first community of education is local community. That would be a particular neighborhood or region, right? Maybe like a school community, local school community, local neighborhood. The second community of education is administrative community, and that refers to a particular politically determined identity, maybe a country, a city, a county, or a school district. Okay. The third community of education is the social community, and that refers to this in more like informal, or the actual set of relationships that exist between people who are in who form a community, and that is not even restrained by any boundaries, like I mean local or administrative boundaries, right? For example, the social community of a school refers to all the people that are involved with the school's activities, right? So the fourth, community of education is instrumental community. That kind of community is established through direct or indirect activities or interactions of people who work together. Perhaps an example could be a group of teachers who work in a school, in one school, right? Or maybe a group of teachers who form a teachers union or another sub-organization. Ethnic community is the one that is established through affinity with a particular national, racial, or socioeconomic group, right? And finally, the sixth community of education is the ideological community, which is based on historic, conceptual, or socio-political beliefs, and it really, this kind of community stretches across the boundaries, whatever they are, local, administrative, social, or instrumental, or ethnic, right? An example of ideological communities, examples could be Christian, maybe, or communist communities, right? Basically, Getzel kept revising his original model alone or with colleagues, okay? And first, the the idea was to add more dimensions, and basically initially cultural dimension was added, and then later that cultural dimension, those cultural aspect in the model was developed even further.